I wasn't looking for a historical war when I started researching Etruscan origins. I was simply reading Herodotus, the father of history, trying to understand how he described the peoples of ancient Italy in the 5th century BC. I expected to find answers. What I found was one of the most heated debates of antiquity, a debate that continues, unresolved, 2,500 years later. 3 theories, 3 completely different explanations about where the Etruscans came from, and here's the strange part. Each one comes from respected historians of antiquity, not from dubious sources, not from vague myths, from historians who investigated, who interviewed witnesses, who examined evidence. Herodotus said the Etruscans came from Lydia in Anatolia, fleeing a devastating famine. Hellanicus of Lesbos claimed they came from Thessaly in Greece, migrating across the Adriatic. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, after examining the evidence, concluded that they were autochthonous natives of Italy all along. 3 ancient historians, 3 completely different answers, and when you examine modern archaeological evidence, things get even more complicated. Today, we're going to investigate the greatest mystery about the Etruscans. Where did they really come from? We'll examine what the ancients said, what archaeologists found, what DNA reveals, and why, after decades of modern research, we still don't have a definitive answer. Let me show you what I discovered. Let's start with Herodotus. Writing around 440 BC, he recorded this story. In Lydia, during the reign of King Attis, a terrible famine devastated the kingdom for 18 years. The Lydians tried to endure, but eventually decided that half the population should depart in search of new lands. According to Herodotus, led by Prince Tyrrhenian, the king's son, they sailed to Smyrna, built ships, and after a long journey arrived in the land of the Umbrians in Italy. There they founded cities and began calling themselves Tyrrhenians, Tirsanoi in Greek, Tyranny in Latin. Seems convincing, a respected historian, a detailed narrative, a clear explanation for the name Tyrrhenians, the Greek name for the Etruscans. So convincing that to this day, the sea west of Italy is called the Tyrrhenian Sea. But there's a problem. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, writing in Rome in the 1st century BC, examined Herodotus' theory and rejected it completely. He investigated. He compared the Etruscan language with Lydian. He compared religious customs. He compared laws and social institutions, and he found no significant similarities. Dionysius concluded that the Etruscans were an autochthonous people natives of Italy since time immemorial, not migrants, not refugees, original Italians. And he wasn't alone. Other ancient writers, including the Greek historian Ephorus, agreed. The Etruscans were Pelasgians, pre-Hellenic peoples who inhabited the region even before the Greeks arrived. But if Dionysius was right, why was Herodotus so convinced of the migration theory? And there's a third theory, less well-known but equally problematic. Hellanicus of Lesbos, a contemporary of Herodotus, claimed that the Etruscans were originally Pelasgians from Thessaly who migrated via the Adriatic route, crossed the Alps, and conquered the region that became Etruria. Livy, the great Roman historian, seemed to partially agree. He wrote that the Raeti, an Alpine people whose language resembled Etruscan, were undoubtedly of Etruscan stock, but had been barbarized by the mountain environment. 3 theories, 3 completely different directions. Lydia in the east, Thessaly in the northeast, or always in Italy. And here's the most frustrating part. None of the ancient authors agreed. They read the same sources, examined the same traditions, and reached opposite conclusions. So what does modern archaeology reveal? Before we examine archaeological evidence, we need to understand something critical about these ancient theories. Herodotus was writing in 440 BC about events that supposedly occurred around 1200 BC, 760 years earlier. That's like us today trying to reconstruct events from the year 1265 AD without written documents. Dionysius was even more distant, writing in the 1st century BC about origins that dated back almost 1,000 years before his time. None of them had access to Etruscan documents about their own origins. Why? Because the Etruscans left no written records about their origins, or they did, and those texts were lost or destroyed when Rome conquered Etruria. So we need to look at what survived, not words, objects. In 1853, archaeologist Giovanni Gozzadini made a crucial discovery near the village of Villanova, south of Bologna. Tombs, hundreds of them, dated between 900 and 700 BC. Distinctive biconical cinerary urns, bronze weapons, tools, pottery decorated with geometric patterns. And here's the crucial part. This culture, called Villanovan by archaeologists, appears around 900 BC in the region that would become Etruria, not suddenly, not as an invasion, but as a gradual development from the previous local culture, the Urnfield culture. There's no evidence of mass migration, no destruction layer indicating conquest, no sudden change in pottery styles or metallurgy that you'd expect if a new population had arrived. Villanovan pottery evolved smoothly into Etruscan pottery. Metallurgy techniques developed continuously. Burial styles changed gradually from cremation to inhumation, but without disruption. This strongly suggests that the Etruscans were direct descendants of the Villanovan population, that they were, in fact, autochthonous natives of Italy. Case closed? Not exactly. Because there's something strange about the Etruscan language. Etruscan is not an Indo-European language. This is well established. While Latin, Greek, and virtually all ancient European languages derive from the Indo-European family, Etruscan does not. For decades, linguists classified Etruscan as an isolate language with no known relatives. But then, they made intriguing discoveries. In 1885, on the Greek island of Lemnos in the Aegean Sea, they discovered the Lemnos Stele, an inscription in an unknown language, dated to the 6th century BC. When linguists deciphered it, they were shocked. The language, called Lemnian, was surprisingly similar to Etruscan, not identical, but clearly related. And it didn't stop there. In the Eastern Alps, the Raetic people spoke a language that also showed similarities to Etruscan. In 1998, German linguist Helmut Rix formally proposed the Tersinic family, a language group that included Etruscan, Raetic, and Lemnian. But here's the problem. How did these three related languages end up in such different locations? Option 1. Proto-Tyrsinic speakers spread from a central point, perhaps Anatolia, as Herodotus suggested, to Lemnos, Etruria, and the Alps. Option 2. Tyrsinic languages were originally more widely distributed across pre-Indo-European Europe, but were gradually replaced by Indo-European languages, surviving only in these three isolated pockets. Option 3. Pure coincidence, linguistic convergence, trade contact. Though this seems unlikely given the depth of the similarities, the linguistic evidence doesn't solve the mystery, it just adds new layers. So geneticists entered the discussion. If we can't solve this with artifacts or language, maybe DNA can answer. In 2004, a study analyzed mitochondrial DNA from modern Tuscans, people living in ancient Etruria. The results showed significant genetic connections with populations from Anatolia and the Near East. Was Herodotus right? Lydian migration confirmed? Not so fast. In 2013, researchers achieved something far more valuable: DNA from actual Etruscan skeletons, not from modern populations. Skeletons from archaeological sites dated between 700 BC and 100 BC. Ancient Etruscans were genetically similar to other Italian populations of the time. They showed no significant genetic influx from Anatolia or the Near East during the period when they supposedly migrated. In 2019, an even more comprehensive study analyzed genomes from 82 ancient individuals from across Italy, covering 2,000 years of history. The conclusion? Etruscans were genetically very similar to Neolithic populations from Central Europe and Tuscany. They showed continuity with previous local populations. But, and there's always a but, the same study found evidence of small genetic influxes from Eastern Mediterranean populations during the Iron Age. Not a mass migration, not a conquest, but trade, marriages, small groups of immigrants, the kind of gradual mixing you'd expect from an active commercial civilization. So DNA tells us that the Etruscans were fundamentally Italian, with small genetic contributions from traders and immigrants from the Eastern Mediterranean. But this doesn't explain the language. It doesn't explain why Herodotus was so convinced of Lydian migration. It doesn't explain Limnos. So let's recap what we know. Clear continuity from 900 BC onward. Villanovan culture smoothly evolving into Etruscan culture. No disruption, no invasion, no detectable mass migration. Etruscan belongs to the Tyrrhenian family, related to Limnian, Aegean Sea, and Rhaetic Alps. Not related to local Italic languages. Not related to Indo-European. Etruscans were genetically similar to other Italian populations. They showed continuity with local Neolithic populations. Small genetic influxes from the Eastern Mediterranean, but no mass migration. These pieces of evidence don't completely agree, and that's why the debate continues. Let me propose something that might sound absurd until you examine all the evidence. What if everyone was partially right? What if the Etruscan population was fundamentally autochthonous descendants of Neolithic Italian cultures? But around 1200 to 900 BC, during the Bronze Age collapse, small groups of refugees from the Eastern Mediterranean, perhaps including Lydians, perhaps Sea Peoples, arrived in Italy? Not in sufficient numbers to significantly alter the population's genetics, but bringing with them a language, perhaps technological skills, perhaps cultural practices. And this language, for reasons we don't fully understand, prestige, commercial utility, political power of the newcomers, was adopted by the local population, gradually replacing previous languages. This would explain the archaeological continuity. It would explain the non-Indo-European language. It would explain why DNA shows mainly local ancestry with small Eastern contributions. It would explain why Herodotus heard stories of migration because there was migration, but not on the scale he imagined. But this is just a theory trying to reconcile conflicting evidence. I have no definitive proof. Nobody does. The artifacts remain. The inscriptions persist. The DNA has been sequenced, and we still don't have an answer that completely satisfies all the evidence. 3 questions remain without definitive answers. Why doesn't the Etruscan language relate to any local Italian language, but does relate to languages from Limnos and the Alps? What really happened around 900 BC that transformed Villanovan culture into Etruscan civilization, and why was this transformation so profound? Why did Herodotus, Hellanicus, and Dionysius, 3 serious historians, reach such different conclusions examining the same traditions? We may never know with absolute certainty where the Etruscans came from, but we know what they built. Regardless of their origins, whether they migrated from Lydia, descended from the Alps, or were always in Italy, the Etruscans created something extraordinary. 12 cities, a powerful league, a political system that would dominate central Italy for centuries. But why exactly 12 cities? Why not 10 or 15? And what happened to this league when Rome began to rise? In the next episode, we'll explore the 12 cities of the Etruscan League. And we'll discover why this number had a significance that went far beyond politics, a religious significance that the Romans inherited but never admitted. If you have theories about Etruscan origins, or if you've discovered something archaeologists might have missed, leave it in the comments. This is a mystery that's still open. And if you want to continue exploring the civilization that taught Rome to be Rome, subscribe to the channel. The story of the Etruscans is just beginning.